I think if everyone's in, we might kick off, because I should at least have one panel that's not running late at some point during the show. Very big welcome to you. This is All the Games a Stage. We're going to have a bit of a look at the way, well, the way stories are made in gaming. A little bit of a behind-the-scenes look with some incredible people. Now, before I start, I do want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we're meeting today. The Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I, of course, pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. Now, my name is Nick Healey. I host a radio show in Sydney on 2SER, but before that, I spent about 2 decades as a tech and games journalist. Or maybe journalist, I'm not sure how we're doing that these days. I'm just going to be up here kind of directing the conversation. It's actually these people who are the interesting ones you want to be paying attention to. And to introduce them, Gemma, right beside me. Now, Gemma is an Australian actress and voice performer, very often in demand for video game character voiceovers and narration. She's been gaming for about 20 years, and loves it. Colin is an award-nominated actor for stage and screen, a 2-decade veteran of the Brisbane theatre scene, which sounds like it could be very tough, to be perfectly honest. He's a professional voiceover artist with credits on TV, videos, stage show narrations, video games, podcasts, and audiobooks. Snow McNally is an award-winning independent freelance narrative designer, fiction writer, teacher and advocate, specialising in queer fiction and empathetic gaming. Danny McMahon is, well, he got his start as a staff writer on L.A. Noire and Mad Max, and then went freelance, working with studios including Intuitive, Infini, Quest's End, Flat Earth, and most recently, I believe, Robot House. One little note here, which I'm quite fond of, recently trying to get the phrase "going off like a frog in a sock" into Forza Horizon 3. They cut it out. And Kevin is the brains behind this entire conversation. He's a Melbourne-based actor specialising in video games. Has worked recently on Warframe's Plains of Eidolon expansion and a lot of other stuff. There's too much to mention. I'm not going to go into it. Now, look, we talk a lot about sort of job titles, and obviously that was a description of what these people do. It doesn't necessarily tell us what actually goes on in their day-to-day life, and I think that's really interesting to me. Is that I hear things like narrative designer, but I don't necessarily know what that means. So I am going to get everyone to go in turn down here and just describe what a day at work actually looks like. Gemma.
Alrighty. Okay, I'm a voiceover artist, and a typical day would be there's going to be a lot of auditioning. So I have a home studio, so you set up your phone, pads, and wall yourself in, and a lot of it is sending off demo tapes, which means recording your voice in various characters and sending it off to the casting offices of game studios. I do a lot of voiceovers for Australian independent gaming studios, which is a lot of fun. Common accents will be American dialect, some Russian, General Middle Eastern. There's kind of a bit of everything, and it requires a lot of research. So that's a typical day, and then when you actually score the gig, so it's pretty much you do an audition and you let it go. If you wait to hear back, you're doomed, because you'll just get depressed because you don't get every audition, okay? And then when you do get a gig, you just celebrate. And then it's really working with the development studios, writers, the creators, and sending off your samples, recording them at home and sending them over. Or sometimes you'll come into the studio itself, and that's a lot of fun being in the booth. So that's a typical day.
How much of that is agent-based? I'm kind of curious. How much is you sort of networking?
Yeah. This is kind of like, because I'm also a film and television actress, and it's funny because voiceover and acting work have a similar percentage, and I find it probably at 95% of it, you're sourcing yourself. So you're on the ground, you're doing the connections, you're meeting people, and your agent really is just in the background trying to field it from their end. So maybe the studios or the people that you don't have connections with. So yeah, a lot of it is just doing your own legwork. It's effectively your an individual business, and you're drumming it up and doing all that. Yeah.
Colin, what about you?
Oh, gee, I'm coming from a kind of a stage perspective, I guess, because my voiceover credits are kind of limited, but yeah, it's much the same as Gemma has said. Although a typical stage day for me would be going into the venue an hour early, then I'm called for by the stage management team and doing a 45-minute warm-up. So it's not a matter of kind of going in and going, excellent, I'm done. I use a technique called the Linklater voice method, and that requires quite an intensive all body warm-up that leads into being ready from a vocal perspective. And then being a stage actor, you really get the behest of the stage management team, the directorial artistic team as to what you're doing in a particular day. And then if I'm getting voiceover work, it's usually after hours that I'm at the studio at home doing that sort of stuff.
So was voiceover for you sort of downtime from theatre, or was it?
It is, yeah. It's not a full-time thing. I find that voiceover and film and TV is just turn up, deliver the goods, see you later. But with stage, it's much more intensive. It's one of these things where you've got to work at it like a full-time job for 2 or 3 months at a stretch.
Now, Snow, what about you? Because I think you're probably the most mysterious to me in terms of your job description.
I would love to keep it mysterious. Everyone else has very professional-sounding work lives. My day involves waking up, and I may or may not put on pants. I have some breakfast, and if I need to, if I'm starting a job, it usually involves a Skype meeting or two with people who will let me know what they're looking for, maybe give me some examples of the kind of tone they're looking for, or character voices or something. And then I will sit down, I will do some research, which sometimes is watching YouTube videos of characters from video games or TV shows that they want you to write like. Sometimes it's just getting a sense for setting or genre or whatever, and then I will sit down and I will put my fingers against a keyboard and sort of black out, and a few hours later there's stuff on the page, and I send it over to them and I'm like, this happened, is this what you want? And most of the time they send it back and they're like, yeah, this is 80% what we want, and then we go back and forth until they have a script that they're happy with, that they can then sort of pass on to a voice actor to actually read. Sometimes it's perfect right away. That's my favorite. Sometimes it's no, you missed the mark completely, at which point I tell them that they're wrong. I don't, I'm very professional. But yeah, usually once I've written the script and handed it over to them, it's quite often that's the last I'll see of it. I don't really get to talk to voice actors very often and say, oh, this is what I was thinking when I wrote this line. So it's my script based on someone else's idea, going to a voice actor who then puts their own personality sort of on top of that. So a final script is not necessarily, or a final voice reading is not necessarily what I intended when I wrote, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So
I guess I'm curious, narrative designer, when someone hires you on to be a narrative designer, are they expecting polished scripts? Are they expecting overlays or outlines of stories?
Well, so I get hired for a lot of different jobs. Sometimes it's we have this game and we want you to add dialogue on top of it. So there's not really a lot of design work involved there. It's more crafting something that fits what they already have, which is just sort of standard writing. Sometimes I get asked to do narrative treatments, so they're like, oh, we kind of have a world, but we want you to put together something good, really. We want you to take your understanding of genre and storytelling, and take what we've built in terms of the ideas we have for the world we want to make, and piece those together to something that is then presentable to an audience and won't just look like a bunch of sort of programmers in an office had some vague ideas they cobbled together from other stuff that they saw or played.
Putting some meat on the skeleton.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what people are looking for, because you can get a lot of different things out of someone like me. Sometimes people don't want a script at all. Sometimes they just want world building. They want they want meat on those bones. Sometimes they have that meat, and what they want is a script they can pass to an actor who can then actually read something that sounds like something a human would say. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that end up going into the work. So.
Now, Daniel, I know you're freelance now, but I'm kind of curious what the day-to-day of a staff writer actually looks like.
Yeah, so I've experienced sort of both working practices. At the moment, I'm freelance, so I'm in a very similar position to you, Snow. Wake up, pants optional. Walk in very small circles until there's something to write, and then write it down and hope that it's good. Back when I was working on L.A. Noire and Horror of the Orient and Mad Max, I was in-house in a development studio. So consequently, I got to feel more like a developer rather than a kind of useless addendum to development, which is what you often feel like as a writer. You feel completely essential and completely dispensable at the same time. It's kind of weird. But back when I was in studio, you get to do cool things like, speak with artists, do lots of live story development. You just, spitballing, throwing stuff against the wall in rooms. You get to talk to programmers, which I always do with a certain amount of terror. You get to participate in the storytelling process in a whole bunch of ways that aren't just writing it down. You also get, I've had the privilege to work with quite a few actors and really enjoyed, directing voiceover sessions. And with L.A. Noire, it was a lot of fun because obviously the person had to be recorded in the plain white kill room with strapped in a chair with 35 cameras or whatever pointing at them, and you speak to them on a microphone where you're just like, thank you very much. And you just sort of speak to them, you put them in the spaceship and then you speak to them over that thing. So it was a very, very difficult and strange process for the actors involved, but they seemed to really enjoy it, and I really enjoyed being a part of it as well.
So from your perspective, would it be quite normal as a writer to do a fair bit of direction with voice actors as well? In all the cases, all those games that I worked on, I worked under our writer-director, our lead writer-director, who had the closest contact with the actors. I was just lucky enough to be able to supervise some of those sessions when he came too close to losing his mind. And these days in the world of freelance, what's a day look like? Is it also pants optional?
It's the pants optional bit that Snow mentioned. It's also very much like Gemma said. I don't have an agent. I have friends who work in TV and film who have agents, but they all seem to really hate their agents and just kind of complain about how they don't get them good enough seats at dinners and things. But anyway. But yes, I do very much the same thing. It's a lot of getting in contact with people and auditioning, writing test scripts, that process that Snow talked about, where you have to, quite often you'll pitch a treatment or a story or even a bit of script to people, and they'll determine whether you're the right person to write their thing. Very, very much the same thing. You're constantly in chasing all of those gigs that sort of flutter by you like pages out the window.
So the pitching process can often mean, it sounds like, a lot of work that potentially is never going to get paid.
Yeah, that stinks. I have on occasion been paid for pitches and for test scripts by some very, very nice people. Usually, the main problem with it for me is not so much that you don't get paid, it's that by the time you finish writing the thing, you're quite attached to it. I mean, you enjoyed writing it, and you obviously want every gig, so you're trying to swing for the fences to get the job. So you're working really hard to come up with a story that you want. And when you conceive a story, you need to conceive the whole thing, and it needs to kind of live in you. So to write it and then just have it kind of go to somebody's email and never become anything, that's the most frustrating part for me. Not being paid sucks, but that's the most frustrating part to me, the fact that it never gets a life.
Possibly a wildly naive question, but is there ever a fear that you'll pitch something, it's not picked up, and yet the same ideas turn up in a project later on?
It hasn't happened to me yet. I'll retain a lawyer just in case it does.
Right.
But that is
so it is a real fear.
So, sorry?
It is a real fear?
I mean, for me it's not, because I have always been very open with talking to people about stories, about scripts, with giving feedback and taking feedback. With some mates of mine, I run a writer's room where we meet weekly. We all bring in pages if we have them, and people offer all of their feedback for free there all the time. So I'm always quite open with that sort of stuff. I think I will carry on being naive and idealistic until something really horrific happens to me, and then I'll come back to you much more embittered. And,
I think there's something to be said for, like, especially in writing, you kind of have to get on the page of, like, your ideas are not what people are paying you for. A lot of the time, like if someone picks up one of your ideas, that's not the worst thing in the world, because ideas are easy. A lot of the time, like what your skill is, what you're bringing to the table is your ability to turn an idea into a finished product and like executing on an idea. So ideas are not a precious commodity, especially in creative fields where everyone has ideas falling out of them all the time. Like
falling out of which end?
I'd rather keep this panel PG.
And Kevin, what about you? Full-time voiceover, what's a day look like?
So the two things that happen every day when I've got control over my schedule is I start the day by playing games because I love eating dessert first. It's professional research and exercise. Past that point in time, it really depends on what's happening. If I've got stuff that needs to get out the door, then the priority is going to be recording. So that means that I'm going to be probably spending a couple of hours, if I'm behaving well, like hydrating and just waking up and making sure that everything's working to record, because mouth noise is a real factor. If I don't have things that need to get out the door, then it's basically everything that every freelancer does. It's looking at specific hot leads that you're chasing in terms of work. It's looking at basically industry trends. It's connecting with and building authentic relationships with people so that you have both a community, so that you've got basically a community of people who get it that you can talk to. It's Skype conversations with people reading and research. But yeah, on an ideal day, it's stuff that's come in the door that I need to respond to and get out, which means basically getting in the booth, looking at the script and going, okay, what does this mean? What can I do with this?
Interesting. And how much time would you spend, say you've got on a project with those developers, how much time is face-to-face, talking back and forth ideas, going over reads, how much interaction time?
This is going to sound so morose, but it's actually a really lonely gig, because a lot of the time you come in as like the NFL kicker, basically, where you've had amazing people that you are privileged to work with who have gotten that ball basically all but to the end zone. And then they're like, okay, you, and here's the thing, and do the thing. And you're like, great, was that the thing? And they're like, yeah, that was the thing. It went straight through. Okay, bye. And then maybe you'll see them later. It's why basically stuff like Melbourne International Games Week is so valuable, because it's a chance to actually see these people and have a drink with them. But other than that, a lot of the time, basically, unless it's an ongoing episodic project or a sequel, you will work and then that's it. That's done.
Interesting. All right, now, the format for here is we've taken some questions on social media, and we'll take some questions toward the end as well. We've got a couple of videos where Kevin tapped into his network and actually got some quite well-known people to answer a few questions. But one of the biggest questions I hear during Melbourne International Game Week or PAX is, how did you get your start? It seems to be what everyone wants to know. Gemma, how did you get your start?
Okay, I love playing video games. I've been about 20 plus years now. So I can't shut up about them. So I was actually going to a film set, and I was in the back of a car, and the producer and director would drive up the front, and they were driving, and yak, you start talking about what you're passionate about. And Call of Duty this, or Rogue Spear, if anyone knows the Rainbow Six old school stuff, yeah, it's awesome. So I started talking, and then the producer turns around, and he's like, oh, hey, I'm in development with a US company at the moment for a game called Blade Symphony. Do you want a voice on it? And I'm like, oh, just be cool, just be cool. Yeah, okay. It's oh my god, this is the best day of my life. So that's how it started. So I had no clue what I was doing, but I had all passion, and I think that goes a long way for pretty much anything. You can pick up the skill, but because if you don't love something, but you're good at it, your life sucks. Like day jobs or anything like that. But if you love something, like, I'm like, yeah, I'll learn, give me a shot, So there I was in the studio. I got brought in, and I was doing sound effects for taking hits, giving hits, and you're just having fun. You feel like a big kid. So that's really how it started. And then it went from there. So word of mouth, you turn up, you do the best job you can. You don't be a dick, and you just it's fun. And then somebody refers you, and then before you know it, you've got a credit. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a voice artist. So that's how it started for me. Just passion led the way.
Colin, what about for you? Obviously, theatre was something you'd kind of built yourself into. Where did voiceover kind of become a thing for you? Or is that just naturally on the back of it, an agent saying, oh, we've got this little gig on the side?
Oh, no, look, I've been playing with voice stuff for since I was really small, since I'm probably watching Sesame Street and all that sort of stuff and trying to imitate Bert and Ernie. But my first voiceover gig was actually for I don't know if anybody remembers the TV series Mortified back in 2006 or something. It was shot on the Gold Coast. And I was doing a lot of extra work for that. And then my agent said to them, oh, this guy can do really good voices. And so I got dragged into a studio one day to do a couple of voices, and I'm still getting residual checks for that one as well, which is amazing. I love it occasionally. Every year. Oh, okay, they're still paying me. It's on Netflix, I think that's why I'm still getting checks. But yeah, I actually credit getting into games to that guy in the end there who. I didn't have a home studio until one day a mic and a stand appeared on my doorstep. He'd coordinated with my girlfriend to have this stuff delivered to me, and suddenly I'm doing voiceovers from my house. And also Kevin has got me in touch with a whole lot of gaming people. So yeah, that guy there did a lot of the legwork for me.
So what about you?
Oh, my story is so much less fun. I was not really someone who made games for a long time. I just kind of wrote a lot of sort of classic linear fiction, short stories, novels that never quite made it to the end, that kind of thing. And I went through a particular stretch of time when like I just got out of like a long-term relationship. I sort of was recovering from a fairly invasive surgery, and I sort of sat down and went, well, I'm bored and lonely and sad, and I want to do something different. So I sat down and I made an interactive fiction game about kind of being trans through the lens of high school witches, because yes.
Most things make more sense through that lens.
It does, yeah. There's a very complicated concept called analogy, which I don't want to drop some high-level theory on you, but so I wrote that sort of like in a vague haze over the course of like 6 months. I didn't really have a lot else going on. I finished it. I just sort of like put it out in the world for free. The Game Developer Awards rolled around, and I was like, "Well, I made a game. Here, like, do you like it?" And they looked at it and they went, "Actually, yes. We're not sure why we like it, but we do. Here's an award." And that was a very weird time because I was not really entrenched in the scene. I didn't know a lot of people, but from that point, people kind of were like, "Oh, who's this clown?" And how do we get to know what they're about? So I've kind of had offers come in through that, and just sort of people knowing people who sort of say, "Oh, you're looking for a writer? I know a writer," and they sort of put me in touch. We email a few times. I'm like, "Yeah, of course I can do that thing." Half the time I don't know if I can do that thing until I do it. But you never open with that. You'll never get a job. So yeah, mostly now it's just sort of momentum and word of mouth. I'm not the world's best networker because anxiety. So yeah, it was a bit of luck, a whole lot of angst, and now a rolling ball.
Very, very cool. And I do know that freelancer experience. You are never too busy, and you can always do it if there's money at the end of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yikes. Daniel, what about you? Teen witches as well?
Yeah, I went to witch school. Mine was as simple as I studied English literature at the University of Sydney, and when it came time, I answered an ad on seek.com. Team Bondi were advertising, and I answered the ad. I wrote a script. I had a very similar experience where I was like, "You like that? Oh, goodness me!" I was lucky enough to get my break with this script. I go back and look at it now and think, this is the thing that started everything for me, because I met so many people and had so many opportunities off the back of that. And I go back and read that script and think how unbelievably lucky I was. But yeah, a few years in a staff writer situation in bigger studios obviously builds lots of those connections, so I've been able to carry that on a little bit. Freelance, it's tough, but it's, you know, every year it gets easier because you know more people, and those emails come in where somebody who knew somebody says, I know a person with a writing problem. I can put you in touch with them.
Kevin? It's hard to put a finger on one moment because it feels like, certainly for me, each project basically that you do, once you're done with it, it's not like you can say, well, I'm famous now, I'm going to have a biscuit and a lie down. It only sort of builds momentum as far as you can push it into the next thing. Probably the thing that made the most difference, though, is it was the moment when I literally decided to start doing this. Like, I've done a lot of corporate training. That was actually what got me into this. I've done corporate training for 10 years. And there was one day when I was doing a training course that I delivered the week before, and this was about day 4 or 5, and corporate training is tremendously tedious. It's 8 hours a day, basically, of just song and dance and trying to keep people awake. You're literally entertaining people. And so I was doing some stupid voice. I can't even remember what it was, but I was just trying to keep those people awake, to keep me awake. And one of the students said, you should be in radio. And I thought, yeah. And then from there, it was just a matter of figuring out how that worked. And then there's been a lot of moments since, but that's probably the biggest moment.
It's an interesting one to me, because you look at, say, people who rep voiceover artists, and you get a lot of, you're going to have to unlock your Mac again, by the way. Sorry, I don't know how to use a Mac. You get a lot of people sort of saying that we do not take new voices. You know, we only want to represent people who already have representation in the voice world. And I find that, how do you actually kick off? Seamless. It's there the whole time.
Great. Most of the people that I talk to, even basically like big names, like I don't want to name drop, but like I've trained under Dave Fennoy, I've trained under Crispin Freeman, and they're wonderful people. But you talk to them about how they get their work, and it's personal relationships, and it's the momentum that they've built with their career. You talk to them about their agents, and it's that same thing that someone mentioned before about like not getting the great seat at dinner. Most of it comes basically from them just hitting the pavement and getting the work. And these are people who's like, you know, that's the work basically that we aspire to, and they're just doing it the same way.
Interesting. All right, we're going to take a little AV break. As I said, Kevin's put some questions out to people. After this, we're going to come back and get the panel to ask some questions as well. But where are we to start off with? All right, we're going to kick off with Frida Wolf now. Frida is an accomplished voice actor and game developer, recently voiced Sarah Ryder for Mass Effect Andromeda, an Enchantress in the Avengers Assemble animated series.
Hi PAX Australia, I'm Frida Wolf. I was a game developer for 12 years and I've been a voice actor for about 4.5 years. And I wanted to say that my favorite thing about working with game developers is when they get that voice actors are essentially short order cooks. We walk into a room and we're asked to make you a sandwich. Now, we have ideas of what we think is a good sandwich, and if you trust us and you give us some space and just say, I want a sandwich, what do you think is good? What do you think makes a good sandwich? We'll present you with something that we think is excellent and tastes good and that we're very proud of. Versus when we walk into a room and you're like, I want white bread, I want ham, no mayo, cut the corners. There's no room for interpretation or creativity. And even though voice actors are commercial artists, when we're performing someone else's vision, reading someone else's script, listening to someone else's cat, there should still be some wiggle room because you hired us, so trust us to be as creative as you are. Give us a little room to make you a sandwich that is probably gonna knock your socks off. So for example, I just got out of a great session where the client would give me a description of the character, show me an image, some concept art, walk me through what this character's about, and then just kind of step aside and say, so what do you think? What would you like to do? And let me try. And sometimes they're like, damn, you're right, this is a good sandwich. So I would like for all of you to sometimes just trust the voice actor that you hired to make you a damn good sandwich. and then see what you think, before just asking for ham on white bread with the sides cut off. Thanks, have a great con.
Alright, we're going to keep the voice thing going. Tom Taylorson is who we're going to hear from now. Now, Tom Taylorson, also Mass Effect Andromeda, Octodad, Deadliest Catch, and most recently Battle Chef Brigade.
What's the best gift a writer has given you as part of the script for a character? Honestly, just having it in the box and part of the production is the biggest gift of all. The gift of work. But more than that, I think Mass Effect Andromeda, the Liam loyalty mission, it was just a joy to perform it. It was written like a buddy cop film, and so it was just kind of easy to flow into that, and I've never been in a buddy cop film or anything like that, so it was wonderful to take part in that, and it was almost effortless to execute because of how it was written, and you just went, yep, I know how this goes, oh, I know how this scene plays, I know how this is done. It was just a joy to do. So I think anytime that when it's written right and I'm cast correctly, and everything just kind of flows, and it comes, again, not necessarily easily, but naturally, because there is work involved. That's a gift. That's an absolute pleasure. Bigger than the writing, I think, is the gift of working on a project where you just enjoy the project and everyone involved. Mass Effect Andromeda was that way. Octodad was that way. Battle Chef was that way. I kickstarted that thing. So to be a part of it, then I said, well, I appreciate what you're doing and I support your game. There's nothing out there like this. Make this thing. And then they asked me to be involved in it, and that was just all the better.
And moving away from voice actors and on to writers, let's hear from Peter Castle, lead writer for Whale Hammer Games, who I believe has been working with Gemma on a few things.
I had a really interesting conversation actually with a friend, because I was struggling with that. Like it was sort of really tough because I hadn't done any writing for about a year, and I was like, fuck, I need to not only nail down the style this dialogue's going to be in now that I'm actually writing it, but I need these characters, they need to reflect that, like what I had previously, and I'm really just struggling to find something in my life that like rekindles that. And he gave me really good advice, very simple advice, but he was like, you just need to start looking at what's going on around you in your life currently and finding those things. It's not, you know, it's not going to be the guy you meet in Syria and his family who you lost contact with for 2 years and then turned up later. Like, that story's done and you sort of had your reaction to that. But it was then just, I learned a lot from that, because I guess I started looking around me at the people around me and looking at what was going on with them, and like the stakes were nowhere near as high. You know, this isn't a civil war, but like the emotions and the way they're interacting with each other, it taught me that like you don't need to go looking for inspiration over in like a place that dark. You can find it in the everyday things that are happening around you. Like, there is enough tragedy there. It's just, I don't know, I'm not 100% sure what it is. It might just be the fact that our lives are finite, and if you cast that as a cloth across the way you view everything, then like life is a tragedy, and that there's enough of a well of empathy, emotion, and tragedy there to sustain whatever you need. And so I guess it was really reconnecting with that, and not reconnecting. I sort of have been tapped out of it, because working in a game, you sort of end up in your bubble, and you're like, oh, you're not going to really see the outside world for a while. But then it was like, all right, I need to now. I need to start spending more time with people and feeling what they're feeling, and I sort of just poured that in. As I did that, over time, I did start reconnecting with the stuff that I was doing in the first year. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. that's why that's this way, and that's exactly what I wanted to do with it. And I also brought a couple of people in to help me get there as well with certain parts of it, and they really helped me connect all those dots together, create something which is like close to what we sort of imagined at the start.
And just finally, while we kind of think about how nice Kevin's headphones look in that, Lyndall Grant, she's a director of Captivate Action, working as a highly skilled motion capture performer and director, as well as a fight director and a movement specialist. We did hope to have her on the panel, but she was very, very busy.
In London, no less.
Oh.
Hi there, my name is Lyndall Grant, and I am an actor who then became a fight director, and recent years I've actually merged into motion capture, acting and directing as well. The way I got into motion capture was actually working with two ladies called Carrie Teal and Michelle Williams, who were the ones responsible for the movement for motion capture in the Lord of the Rings series. And I did a workshop with them, and a very good workshop called the Paddy Crean International Workshop, which is in Canada every 2 years. And it was my first experience of finding a medium which for me encapsulated everything I loved about performing. So it was full body, it was full imagination, it was full voice, and every part of you as a performer is engaged in 360. So for me, it was a very exciting medium to start to work in. Good. I just wanted to draw your attention to the beautiful music you might be able to hear in the background. You might not. I'm in London at the moment, in P.A.M.E.L.A, and there's a very spirited rendition of a hymn going on outside, so just in case you can hear that. So just looking at whether how motion capture, the vocal work in motion capture differs from that working in a booth. Now, I haven't done that much vocal work in a booth before, but my experience is very much in how voice and body are completely connected. In fact, I don't think, for me personally, I don't think you can really separate them. When you are working as a movement performer or an actor, integrating the voice with the movement releases the body, releases the intention, releases emotion, and adds a quality of life to the movement that otherwise would not be there if the voice or the breath were held. Same in reverse, if you are producing the voice, it is so much more full and integrated if you have the body behind it. So I think the benefit of being able to do vocal work in the volume is that you do get the whole body combining towards the intention in the moment, rather than a sort of disembodied voice that could result from just working from stillness.
Very cool. Now, in about 5 minutes, we'll take some questions from you as well, but we had a couple of questions that were asked on social media beforehand. And I've got one for the writers, and this is sort of interesting to me, so I'm going to go away from the mic, you don't have to do that thing. Research-wise, how essential, I mean, how much of your day is actually tied up researching before you begin to write?
I can say briefly, having worked on L.A. Noire and War of the Orient, which if you haven't heard of it, was going to be a spiritual successor to L.A. Noire set in Shanghai in 1936, which is an even richer historical setting if you've ever read anything about it. In both of those cases, we were talking earlier about a day in the life of a staff writer. Most of my work on both of those titles was research. L.A. Noire, we had a newspaper archive of every day's newspaper running from December 1945 to January 1947. So there was a lot of just reading old articles in the LA Times. On War of the Orient, we managed to get access to the Shanghai Municipal Police files, which were kept in Shanghai during the British occupation, but were removed when the communists took over and actually ended up in the National Archives in Washington, DC. And getting access to the electronic versions of those was an ongoing process that involved, communicating with all sorts of different people and having about 17 different library cards. It was really, really tough. But that whole process of doing that historical research, lots of other games I've worked on about, robot vacuum cleaners don't require quite so much research, but that deep historical research I found a really, really fascinating thing because it gives you so much license and so much authenticity. You sort of read all of that stuff and then you just forget about it, and then you just work with the characters and with the story again.
Yeah, I think it's super dependent on the projects that I work on. Like, some things require a lot of research. Like, if it's a setting that has, like, you know, there is existing information to be known about it and you don't know that information, you can't really write effectively in that setting. If you're writing sort of sci-fi or fantasy stuff, then there's less specific research you can do, although there's still a lot of, like, making sure that you're brushed up on, like, the conventions and tropes of the genre.
Aliens made a hole in the spaceship with their laser thingy and all the space is getting in. I pitched that from a Mitchell & Webb sketch, but it's a great one.
I do tend to, like, fall down science rabbit holes a lot in situations like that, where I have to write a thing and I'm like, how would this thing actually work? Like, what is the science behind this non-existent technology? And I will go from one article to another, and before I know it, it's 3 hours later, and I have, like, half a degree on theoretical physics written down.
On the question of a day in the life, Wikipedia holes.
Yes,
it's really the main thing you do.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, a lot of it is, like, stuff that crops up sort of, like, as I hit a stumbling point and I realise I don't have the answer that I immediately need, and then I have to go search for an answer, which sometimes raises more questions that needs more answers. But unless I'm writing in a very specific setting, like a particular time period or like a particular cultural setting, usually the research happens on the fly. So.
All right, and one for the voiceover artist that's interesting to me. You look at people's credits when you go and find a voice artist you really like, and you'll discover that often they're playing multiple characters in the same project and same game. That's going to be uniquely difficult to kind of switch over, surely.
First of all, they're bastards. Yeah, no, it is interesting. I think it's a matter of knowing your range and what you can do sustainably. Sometimes, like, I've had the experience, newbie era, where you think, oh, I'll go for that voice, and you send in your audition. And in case you don't notice, my register's quite low, so I get, you know, soldiers and warriors and, you know, old women now, which is awesome. It's opened up a whole new field. I've been waiting all my life. So I sent in an audition for a relatively high-pitched young 18-year-old with an American dialect, and got it. And then I'm like, oh shit. After about the first hour, about the first hour in the studio recording booth, I'm like exhausted. You know? So I think it's knowing what you can do, but it's a lot of fun, particularly if you layer on an accent. It can really change your pitch. I find with a general American accent, it tends to raise my voice up, and it sounds really different. And I sound really arrogant for some reason. So American. Anyway, yeah, I'll hand it over.
I love doing more voices than I would normally speak to, you know, maybe a room full of people. I just adore that sort of stuff. I love switching with, now I am suddenly the Russian submarine captain, and now I'm an old man, and, you know, I adore it, I really do. But I think having a versatility of talent in the artistic realm, especially in, you know, a country like Australia, especially maybe in a city like Brisbane, which is a cultural wasteland compared to speaking truth here. Really have to diversify the amount of talent that you have. So yeah, I don't mind flexing or playing with any of that sort of stuff. If it improves my range and I can pitch a whole lot of different stuff to clients, then awesome, it gets me more work.
What about you, Kevin? Similar experience? Or?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I guess there's the technical part of it, but I mean, this is why we do you do regular training, like with a voice coach, and you're working on building your register high and low, you're working on resonance. Like again, I'm going to sound like I'm terribly name dropping, but literally it was like one thing that Crispin Freeman mentioned when I was doing coaching with him once. He said, do resonance work? It's like, okay, I'll find out what that is. I wasn't going to say, yeah, I don't know what that is. But that's literally been years of work, and that's all about building up the register, because as long as you can support a different character with a different sound, and there are so many options in terms of like where you can go with that. It's the whole idea basically of just having all of this stuff in your back pocket because you've constantly trained to have those options there where you can go, okay, well, I'll combine that with that and let's see how that goes. Then you just look at the script for whatever the lines are, and you've got another option that you can bring forward, because each character is such a momentary like transition. Like you do the line, and literally sometimes you'll forget after the line what you've said, especially with audiobooks. So it's not like you'll get stuck on an individual character's role. It's all just basically switching over to, okay, what's my thought process here and building up, and that's kind of more difficult. It's for each individual line, it's building up that full mental landscape of where am I and what's happening so that you can actually deliver that line with authenticity.
Right. Let's take some questions from the audience. Fling your hand up, and an enforcer with a mic will come over. Go back there.
Hi guys. I'm not sure if this will apply as much to the writers, but it might do. Do you find you ever use like a mimetic trigger, like a pose or a phrase or something to help you drop into a character's voice? And do you have any examples of times that you've done that?
Oh god, yeah. Definitely accent work. There's particular. If I wanted to say put on an Irish accent, I'd probably say "fiddly dear potato," and suddenly I'm there. I find say working with the German accent is actually really tough to do from that kind of perspective. I have to hear a lot of it to kind of get into the zone, so I'll maybe do a little bit of language work beforehand before I can kind of get into that. But yeah, totally. I think, well, not I think, it is a fact. Your voice mechanism is a muscle, and it can be trained in certain ways, and this is why I do warm-ups for 45 minutes at a go every time. But I've trained myself in that particular fashion. So we talk about muscle memory as well. That a muscle will remember things. And martial artists will know this and that sort of stuff. Your muscles will work before you're even thinking about them. And I think that is definitely the same for the voice. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, I agree with what Colin said. It's definitely practicing. So you're in the shower, you're doing accents, it's a lot of fun. I also find physicality helps with dropping in, and I use it all the time. And now I can't get out of it. So if I'm doing a voice, like the older woman voice, I've got a hunchback and I can't see the mic for some reason. And it really does. It is so my hips gone. And it helps. So physicality and just repetition, and then you just know which cards you've got that are your best. Like you can nail that, and you can do that. But YouTube is also great, and other gamers. Like when you play a lot of video games, you're just hearing that all the time. Like there are a lot of accents on World of Warcraft, for example, like the Draenei, which are great for a general Middle Eastern, and then you just like tailor it, and yeah, it's loads of fun. Yeah.
I have nothing to add.
All right, another question, please. Hand up. Let's go with down front there.
How's it going? First of all, I love Robespierre. Thank you very much. It's awesome. I've got two questions. This is mainly for the writers. Back in the Greek days, they established the 3-act rule for a lot of narratives and a lot of stories, and they established things like the hero's journey and themes of redemption and themes of war is bad, and this is the reason why the story is being written. Do you ever feel that following these structures, as good as they are, can sometimes hinder how you would want to create your own stories or how you'd want to move on with your stories? Because there's a lot of stories that are just starting to be very similar nowadays. The amount of times I've seen hero films or these other films where it's like giant glowy thing from the sky wants to destroy New York, or the usual kind of thing. You want to really break away from that. I mean, how do you feel about either sticking with the structure or trying to break away from that structure? And the second question, which should be nice and easy, have you ever had something that you've created that you've given off to another producer or another developer or something like that you've gone, yes, this is going to be the best thing ever, and they've either hit it out of the park or gone completely wrong, and you've gone, oh, the final product is like, why did they do
To answer the first question, I would like to take the hero's journey, write it on a piece of paper, and scrunch it up, put it in the bin, set the bin on fire. I am very much not a fan of like very rigid conventional story structures. They have their place, but
it's the expectation. It's the expectation.
Yeah, I don't like predictable narratives, but a lot of audiences do. So it really depends on what you're trying to do with a story, because sometimes an existing framework is like a benefit to telling a story because you're putting an audience in familiar territory, which lets you then build on that to explore other ideas.
Structure is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Structure is not a bad thing. The hero's journey you're talking about is a Hollywood affectation, so that's why it sucks so much. But in terms of a 3-act structure, all the 3-act structure is that a story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is what a story has always been since ancient Greece. It's exactly as you're saying, and a good story will have a beginning and a middle and an end, a thing that's identifiable as the beginning, as the middle, and as the end. I don't think there's anything to be afraid of in terms of structure. My argument has always just been serve the story. Don't serve the structure.
Yeah.
Don't serve the screenwriting books, all that save the cat.
Yeah,
Bullshit.
Structure
Action beat on page 20.
Structure is a tool, one of many, and you can use it to make a story better, or you can rely on it and make a story worse if you're not thinking about how it serves the story that you're trying to tell. Because every story has a point, and different structures will serve different points. So.
And to answer your second question briefly, I would link it back to what we were talking about with freelancing. It's every single time you do it, you hand off a script to somebody and you have to see, how the thing turns out. Sometimes it's better than you could possibly have imagined, and they make you look really, really good. Sometimes you disagree with what happens after you turn the script in.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, but that's the thing about being a freelancer. You own them, and then you get them over. And it's the same for the actors here. We can write the thing, but we still have to collaborate with an actor to get the.
I think my favorite example of that was to write a character that had already been sort of like a bunch of that character had been written by someone else, and I then come in for sort of like a side story involving that character. This character was like the one Australian character in an American cast. And was written
like a frog in a sock.
Was originally written by an American writer. So I came in and I looked at the old stuff and I'm like, none of this is Australian. This reads like a Canadian character. So
it's kind of like if you've ever watched The Simpsons and they had that Australian episode and a lot of the characters sounded more like Canadian or New Zealand, and you're like, what are you doing?
So I made this character as Aussie as I could possibly make them because I was quite offended, and I was like, all right, no, you're getting every obscure Aussie expression that I can cram in, and I gave it to them, and they're like, what the fuck does any of this mean? Like, you wanted an Australian character. So they edited the crap out of that, and it ended up looking like what the old writer wrote, not what I wrote. It was a little disappointing, but at the same time, it was for an American audience, and the audience had to be able to identify with and understand it.
The whole Crocodile Dundee stereotype.
Yeah. I probably shouldn't have been as spiteful as I was, but
good answers, by the way.
I'm the one Australian writer at that company, so...
We know it's Australian, but can you make it more American?
It was exactly that, yeah.
Thanks for the answers, guys.
Yeah.
All right, unfortunately, I think we might call it there. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so can I get a big round of applause, please? Thank you for coming along and enjoy the rest of PAX. Have a great day.